Are you wondering if your family is dysfunctional? The short answer is yes, it surely is. But the good news is you are not alone. Because guess what? Everybody's family is dysfunctional. You know why? Because they have people in them. And people have dysfunction. I believe that quote was from Dr. Phil. But humans overall, we're imperfect. We're people that struggle, that cause hurt and get hurt, right? And so that is dysfunction. So today, I want to talk to you about 4 signs of dysfunction. And then you can decide for yourself, which ones apply to you, apply to your family overall. So a dysfunctional family is typically conflict, misbehavior, or even abuse. That's all dysfunction. Absolutely. But I want you to know there's another level of dysfunction that might not be so obvious. Sometimes you don't think about this type of dysfunction because it's not as in your face obvious. But where there's relationships between family members, when those relationships become tense and can be filled with, yelling, arguing, screaming, neglect, that's dysfunction as well. So there's a lot of things that fall into that category. But number 1 is poor communication. So one of the biggest pieces of poor communication is lack of active listening. And I am really a proponent of this. I talk about this a lot because I know we all do it. But many times your family members are talking over each other. Maybe they're not even paying attention. Maybe they're on their phone, right? When someone is speaking and they're not being heard, it almost always leads to a misunderstanding and or frustration of some type. And so that is one aspect. And we also are clearly avoiding difficult conversations, right? That's another one. That leads to the point where important topics that they want to talk about are either avoided or swept under the rug, right? It's just easier to just not talk about it. And that prevents resolution. So another thing is misinterpretation of intent. This happens all the time. It has happened to all of us, I guarantee. But that leads to different messages that are misconstrued by other people, right? The other person you're having a relationship with, in this case, your adult son or daughter. So that can lead to a conflict based on misunderstandings, right? Rather than the actual intent. We say things, we're not clear with what we hear, we're not clear with what we're saying, and that leads to that. And so if we were more actively listening and spoke back to that other person, for example, what I hear you saying is XYZ, because then they know you heard them, you listened, and if you were incorrect, they could correct you, no, that's not what I said, or that's not what I meant. And that would help a lot. That right there would help immensely, just help in that whole area. And that goes for every relationship in our world, right? Number 2 is unresolved conflicts. We have this massive avoidance of conflict resolution in our families and in our world overall. So rather than addressing them directly, we either ignore the issue or talk to someone else about it, right? That only allows resentment, in my opinion, to build. And then that becomes a pattern where these similar conflicts are happening over and over and they're not getting resolved. And that right there, when you think about it, that's telling us that there's an underlying issue that needs attention. If you're fighting about the same thing over and over and over, there's an underlying issue, right? Always. And so how do majority of us handle that? Usually with blame or getting defensive. So family members end up blaming each other without taking self-responsibility for our part, which once again hinders that whole resolution process. And so all of these can escalate our emotions, which makes it difficult to, have just basic rational discussions and then be able to find some solutions to our problems, because that really is the bottom line. And honestly, if you are a mom realizing that, yes, my family has dysfunction and you're struggling in some of these areas and you're struggling navigating, the path of estrangement, I want you to reach out to me via the link below, Discovery Call link, and we can discuss how I can help you via my different coaching vehicles, whether it be one-on-one or group or whatever we think is best for you. I can give my recommendation, and then obviously, clearly, that's completely up to you how you proceed. But I want to be able to offer you what I think could fit your needs. And so I look forward to talking to you soon. Number 3 is lack of boundaries. This can go for anyone and everyone. I mean, this could be any family member and how family members intrude on each other's personal space or privacy, and that too can lead to resentment. But by the way, I want you to know I'm not referring to the adult child who's literally trying to overtake your home and refuses to do anything around the house and all of that. You know, privacy is a privilege, something I used to tell my kids all the time when they were little. But that, I'm not referring to that situation. I'm referring to just in general, because, you know, enabling comes in this types of situations because we don't have any boundaries around whether it's finances with our money, right? So we end up fighting over maybe some money matters, which that causes a strain on your relationship. And along with that too, there's like rules, responsibilities that are unclear, which cause confusion. So especially if they're living in your home is what I'm referring to there. And so, but if we really sat down and defined what that looks like, what do the responsibilities look like in the home? For those of you that have children still at home, adults still at home, you know, that can go a long way in helping. And now this is not to say that we have this wonderful intent that your adult son or daughter is going to participate. But once again, you have to control you. And this year is your responsibility. This is a new year for you to start. This is your responsibility. These are your rules. I'm not enabling you anymore. They're going to have to choose if they're going to participate. And so this is your time to start fresh. Number 4 is role confusion. This one I see mostly with single moms who have raised their kids while they were pretty much a single mom or while they were literally kind of growing up themselves. Maybe you were a young mom. And sometimes that can cause significant problems later on. It's almost like going head to head in a difficult way, not even intentionally, but it's where your son or daughter can take on the parental responsibilities, or you end up becoming more of a friend in those critical growing years. And so that typical parent-child role gets confusing and typically causes like emotional strain later on. So sometimes there's that lack of guidance. Sometimes there's lack of structure or maybe even, inconsistent expectations. So that can definitely impact our relationship because maybe you or your son or daughter feel uncertain about their place within the family. And that can cause issues, obviously. But that too can cause children to tend to struggle to establish their own independence. Like if their roles within the family are not clear, they don't really know what path they're supposed to be on. So that's just something to keep in mind. But if this video resonated with you, I encourage you to click the next video, which talks about understanding estrangement and maybe some possible root causes. That is another video that you could watch. But these are all great things to think about.